Imagine yourself walking through the streets of Jerusalem's Old City. Beneath your feet are cobblestones polished by millions of footsteps. Around you are bazaars, pilgrims, golden domes, the scent of spices and incense, the hum of prayers in 3 languages at once. It seems you are standing at the very center of history. But this is an illusion. The real Jerusalem is not here. The real Jerusalem lies at a depth of 12 to 18 meters directly beneath your feet. When you walk the Via Dolorosa, the path of Christ's crucifixion, the street he walked on lies 8 meters below the asphalt you now stand on. When you pray at the Western Wall and touch its stones, you see only the top 7 rows. Another 19 rows are buried underground. Beneath the Dome of the Rock, one of the oldest mosques in the world, lies a system of caves, cisterns, and tunnels that no one has fully mapped. Jerusalem has been destroyed 23 times. Each time, a new city was built on the ruins of the old, not by clearing them, but simply by covering them over. Millennium after millennium, the city sank into the earth like sediment, forming what geologists would call a stratigraphic section, and historians simply call a layered cake of civilizations. There are 12 kilometers of documented tunnels beneath the city alone. Ground-penetrating radar surveys show dozens of unrecorded voids, reservoirs holding millions of liters of water, and chambers comparable in size to concert halls. This is the first mystery of our investigation. What exactly is hidden beneath Jerusalem? And why, despite a century and a half of systematic excavations, does a complete map of the underground city still not exist? But there is a second mystery, even more unexpected. Beneath the city lie stones that, from a common-sense perspective, should not be there. One stone block at the base of the Western Wall weighs 570 tons. That is roughly equivalent to 120 adult elephants, or a modern airliner. This block was quarried, worked, transported, and installed 21 centuries ago. Several centuries before the advent of mechanical cranes, railway transport, and modern engineering. And in the 8th century BC, 2 groups of builders carved a tunnel 533 meters long through solid rock, working towards each other from opposite ends, and met with a margin of error of 30 centimeters, without compasses, without levels, without any communication through the solid rock. How was this possible? And what exactly were people building with such precision and such effort down there, underground? In this video, we will descend into underground Jerusalem, tunnel by tunnel, layer by layer. We will trace the path from the first British expeditions of the 19th century to modern ground-penetrating radar research. We will examine what is reliably known, what remains a subject of debate, and what is still closed off for political, religious, or scientific reasons. And we will try to understand, why is there still so much unknown beneath the most researched city in the world? Let's begin with the man who first truly understood that another city lies hidden beneath Jerusalem. The year is 1867. British officer of the Royal Engineers, Charles Warren, arrives in Jerusalem with a commission from the Palestine Exploration Fund. He is 30 years old, with an engineering education and experience in colonial expeditions behind him. His task, which sounded simple, is to find traces of Solomon's Temple. The context of this commission is important for understanding what happened next. Victorian England was experiencing an acute intellectual crisis. In 1859, Darwin published On the Origin of Species. The biblical narrative was under attack from science. Church institutions and many educated people felt an urgent need for physical, material proof that the Bible described real events in real places. Jerusalem and Solomon's Temple were at the forefront of this. If physical traces of Solomon's construction could be found, it would support the historicity of the sacred text. Warren is a methodical and pedantic man. He immediately understands the main problem. The Temple Mount cannot be excavated. The Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque stand there, the third holiest site in Islam after Mecca and Medina. Any excavation there would mean immediate religious conflict. Warren decides to dig nearby, at the base of the western wall of the hill. The first test pits yield an unexpected result within weeks. The shovels strike not earth, but a worked stone block at a depth of 12 meters. Warren descends into the shaft himself, on a rope with a candle. In the uneven light, he sees rows of perfectly fitted stones, with seams thinner than a human hair. The masonry descends even deeper. He realizes Jerusalem does not stand on the ground. It stands on layers of buried cities. Warren continues his work for several years. He digs horizontal tunnels along the wall, goes for hundreds of meters, makes plans, measures, sketches. Part of his work was carried out under conditions of extreme physical difficulty. The tunnels were narrow, the air was stale, the risk of collapse constant. Warren personally descended into shafts over 20 meters deep, often without safety lines. His reports, published upon his return to London, caused a sensation. The result of his work, the first systematic map of underground Jerusalem, becomes one of the most important documents in the history of biblical archaeology. He expected to find 3 or 4 layers of urban deposits. In reality, there were significantly more. Modern archaeologists count dozens of distinct construction horizons, each corresponding to a separate historical era. In the lowest layer reached by Warren, Jerusalem from the time of King David 3,000 years ago. Above that, a layer of ash and charcoal 1 meter thick, the trace of destruction by Babylon in 586 BC. Higher still, Jerusalem from the era of the Second Temple, destroyed again, this time by the Romans in 70 AD. Then, layers of early Islam, the Crusaders, the Mamluks, the Ottomans. Each layer is separated from the next by a mixture of construction debris, ash, and earth. A chronology of violence compressed into stone. Warren's discovery marked the beginning of the era of systematic excavations in Jerusalem, which continues to this day. And the longer it continued, the clearer it became. The scale of the underground city is not inferior to, and by some estimates even exceeds, the scale of the city above ground. Now let's descend to a place that is perhaps the most impressive of everything discovered in underground Jerusalem. To the Western Wall tunnels. The Western Wall, the Wailing Wall, is the holiest site in Judaism. It is not the wall of the temple itself, as is sometimes thought. It is the western retaining wall of the enormous artificial platform created by order of King Herod in the 1st century BC to expand the Temple Mount. The temple itself stood atop this platform. When the Romans destroyed it in 70 AD, they demolished the structures, but did not have time or did not deem it necessary to dismantle the massive retaining walls. They remained standing and, over time, sank into the cultural layer. Modern tourists see the top 7 rows of this wall rising above the plaza in front of it. Another 19 rows are hidden underground. That's a total of 26 rows of stone descending to a depth of 14 meters. And when in the 1970s and 1980s, Israeli archaeologists dug a tunnel along the buried part of the wall, something appeared before them that changed the understanding of ancient engineering capabilities. Approximately 300 meters from the tunnel entrance is what researchers call the Western Stone, a single stone block measuring 13 meters and 60 centimeters long, 3.5 meters high, and extending into the wall to a thickness of about 4 meters. The estimated volume is about 190 cubic meters. The estimated weight is 570 tons. This is the largest worked stone block known in Jerusalem, and one of the largest in the world ever moved and set by humans. For comparison, the largest block in the Great Pyramid of Cheops weighs about 80 tons. The Western Stone is 7 times heavier. How was it delivered? How was it installed? These are not rhetorical questions. This is a real engineering problem that still has no definitive explanation. The quarry from which this block was apparently extracted is relatively nearby, within a few hundred meters. But relatively nearby for 500,000 tons of limestone is still extremely far. Modern engineers, when asked how such a block could have been transported in the 1st century BC, typically answer, very slowly, with a very large number of people, and probably using rollers, sledges, and an enormous amount of organizational effort. But a full experimental reconstruction of this process has never been carried out. The Western Stone is not the only one. Throughout the buried part of the Western Wall are blocks weighing from 100 to 300 tons. All of this is the result of a single construction campaign carried out over about 20 years by order of Herod the Great. An army of builders, whose numbers are estimated in the tens of thousands, created one of the largest construction projects of the ancient world. The scale of Herodian construction is astounding to this day. Herod did not simply decorate an existing mountain, he expanded it. The original hilltop was relatively narrow. To create a sufficiently large platform for the new temple and its entire courtyard system, builders erected massive retaining walls around the perimeter, similar ones on the west, south, and east, and filled the space between them and the mountainside with enormous volumes of rubble and stone. Essentially, an artificial mountain within a mountain was created, a monumental architectural staging designed to make the temple visible and impressive from any point in Jerusalem and its surroundings. We have reached the midpoint of our investigation. We have descended 12 to 14 meters deep into Jerusalem and seen what is hidden beneath its streets. We have examined the scale of the underground city and the mystery of the impossibly heavy stone blocks. But there is one more tunnel that deserves separate discussion, because it is perhaps the most astonishing engineering achievement in all of underground Jerusalem. And it was created not in the era of Herod, but 7 centuries earlier. Hezekiah's Tunnel. 8th century BC. The Assyrian Empire under King Sennacherib is advancing on Jerusalem. The Judean king Hezekiah understands. A prolonged siege is inevitable. The city's main vulnerability is its water supply. The Gihon Spring, which gives life to the water, is outside the city walls, in the Kidron Valley. If the Assyrians cut off access to it, the city will die of thirst before arrows. Hezekiah makes a decision that to this day is considered one of the greatest engineering feats of the ancient world. He orders a tunnel to be carved through the rock from the Gihon Spring to the Pool of Siloam, which is already inside the city walls. The length of the tunnel is 533 meters. The height in most places is from 1 to 2 meters. It was carved by two crews working simultaneously from both ends. When an inscription carved in stone, in Hebrew, dating to precisely this period, was discovered in the tunnel in 1880, it described the moment the two crews met. And when there were still 3 cubits to be cut through, the voice of a man was heard calling to his fellow, for there was a fissure in the rock on the right hand and on the left. And on the day of the breakthrough, the stone cutters struck each to meet his fellow, pick against pick, and the water flowed from the spring to the pool. This inscription, known as the Siloam inscription, was discovered by a teenager wandering through the tunnel. It is now housed in the Istanbul Archaeological Museum. It is one of the most important epigraphic pieces of evidence from the First Temple period. However, behind the poetry of this description lies an engineering reality that continues to astonish researchers. 2 teams of stonecutters worked in darkness, in a narrow space, without compasses, without levels, without modern surveying instruments. They advanced towards each other through a monolithic rock with a total length of over half a kilometer and met with a horizontal deviation of about 30 centimeters. How did they do it? Several theories exist. According to one, they followed natural cracks and voids in the rock mass, which explains the winding rather than straight form of the tunnel. According to another, they used sound. One team struck the rock, while the other tried to hear the blows through the stone, correcting their direction. According to a third theory, the construction supervisors possessed sufficiently precise knowledge about the mountain structure, accumulated during previous construction work. None of these theories fully explains the accuracy of the result. Hezekiah's tunnel remains one of those monuments that speaks about us, about our tendency to underestimate the capabilities of people who lived without our technology, but with the same intellect, and perhaps with a much deeper practical knowledge of the specific terrain, the specific stone, and the specific task. The tunnel itself is open to visitors today. It is one of the few sections of underground Jerusalem where one can walk with one's own feet. Water still flows in it. In some places, the ceiling drops so low that one must bend down. The temperature inside is constant, significantly lower than the summer heat above. Walking knee-deep in water through an 800- or 900-year-old tunnel in the darkness, a person gains some, albeit very approximate, sense of what it meant to build this in the 8th century BCE with candles or torches in the dust of limestone chips. Now let us discuss what makes the study of underground Jerusalem particularly difficult, and the reasons why a complete map of these subterranean spaces still does not exist. Jerusalem is perhaps the only city in the world where every shovel thrust into the ground is a potentially political act. Beneath the old city lie quarters, each with its de facto master: the Jewish quarter, the Muslim quarter, the Armenian quarter, the Christian quarter. The Temple Mount, the place where the claims of 3 religions converge, is the hottest spot. Excavations beneath it are prohibited. Any construction work on or near it immediately becomes the subject of international protests. Dan Bahat, an Israeli archaeologist who dedicated 4 decades to studying underground Jerusalem, formulated this problem with complete frankness. According to him, science knows less about underground Jerusalem than about the pyramids of Giza, precisely because the pyramids can be studied without risking the provocation of a religious conflict. In Jerusalem, every discovery can either confirm or cast doubt on someone's historical claims, and this immediately shifts academic discussion into the realm of politics. The story of Eilat Mazar's expedition is illustrative. In 2005, this Israeli archaeologist began excavations south of the Temple Mount. The work yielded significant results. A monumental building with cedar beams and seals bearing officials' names was discovered, dating to the 10th century BCE, a time traditionally associated with the era of King David. The find immediately sparked protests, as the excavations were conducted in an Arab quarter. According to Mazar, a tunnel she discovered leading under the Temple Mount was sealed by unknown persons during night work. The tunnel's contents remained unexplored. Mazar passed away in 2021. Her archives were transferred to state repositories with restricted access. This is not the only such case. Tunnels discovered and partially investigated, then closed or backfilled for political or religious reasons, form a separate chapter in the history of Jerusalem archaeology. The Israel Antiquities Authority does not publish a complete map of the underground city. The official reason is security concerns. Unofficially, archaeologists who have worked in the tunnels acknowledge it's not just about security. The issue is that the map itself is a political document that could be used in arguments about sovereignty over various parts of the city. Now let us turn to one of the most famous and most mysterious chapters in the history of underground Jerusalem research, to an expedition that still raises more questions than answers. 1911. A young British aristocrat, Montague Parker, receives funding from a group of wealthy patrons and arrives in Jerusalem with a special purpose. Officially, for archaeological research in the area of Gihon. Unofficially, according to later sources, he was interested in something much more specific. The location where, according to a number of interpretations of medieval texts, the treasures of the first temple might have been hidden. Parker obtained permission for excavations by paying a large bribe to the Ottoman authorities. For several years, his men worked in tunnels and shafts around Gihon. Then, in April 1911, something occurred that caused a scandal, the echoes of which reached European newspapers. Parker and his men were caught working inside the mosque's enclosure, directly on the Temple Mount, in a place where they had no official permission. The details of what exactly happened that night remain unclear. What is known is this: the expedition was immediately disbanded. Parker hastily left Jerusalem and sailed from Jaffa, taking with him several sealed crates. His guards were arrested. The scandal reached an international level. In Jerusalem, a mood close to unrest reigned for several days. What exactly did Parker find, or not find? Officially, nothing significant. According to some accounts, some pottery and Bronze Age artifacts. What was in the sealed crates he took away? The answer is unknown. No serious academic source recorded significant finds from Parker's expedition, but the very fact of secret work on the Temple Mount, the hasty flight, and the secret crates secured this expedition a place in the history of Jerusalem mysteries, a place it holds to this day. Now let us discuss the water system of underground Jerusalem, because it is perhaps the least known and most impressive part of what lies hidden beneath the city. Jerusalem stands atop a mountain ridge in a region where the average annual precipitation is low and extremely unstable. A city without a reliable water supply would not survive a prolonged siege, and sieges have occurred regularly in its history. Therefore, for millennia, its inhabitants created increasingly complex systems for water collection, storage, and distribution. Beneath and around the Temple Mount lie dozens of cisterns, reservoirs, and pools carved into the rock. According to research from the late 19th and early 20th centuries, about 37 separate water containers were identified just under the mount itself. The total capacity of these reservoirs, according to calculations from that time, was about 10 to 12 million liters. This quantity was sufficient to supply a significant population for many months. Some of these cisterns were created during the period of the Second Temple, around the 1st century BCE, in the era of Herod. Some date back to earlier periods. Some of them still contain water, though unfiltered and unfit for drinking. Most of them are currently inaccessible to researchers. Hezekiah's Tunnel, which we discussed earlier, is part of this broader system. The Pool of Siloam, where it leads the water, the endpoint of the route, was one of the main public reservoirs of Jerusalem during the Second Temple period. According to the Gospel of John, it was here that Jesus healed a man blind from birth. The pool itself was rediscovered in 2004 during sewer work, directly beneath a street in an Arab quarter. In addition to cisterns, aqueducts exist beneath the city, channels that brought water from sources southwest of Jerusalem. The so-called Solomon's Pools, 3 large reservoirs several kilometers from the city, have been a source of water for Jerusalem since ancient times. The system of channels that brought water from them is partially preserved and partially documented. All of this together represents an infrastructure that, in its complexity, scale, and durability, has no parallel among cities of the ancient world of comparable size. Jerusalem was not just a city, it was an engineering project in which underground space was used as purposefully and intensively as the space above ground. Let us now turn to one of the most acute questions related to underground Jerusalem, the question of acoustics. Because here, academically confirmed facts border on an area where interpretations diverge widely. Acoustics researchers who have worked in the underground spaces of Jerusalem and other ancient structures have recorded a phenomenon that is not accidental. In certain chambers carved into the rock, the acoustic properties are unusual. They amplify sounds of certain frequencies, creating a resonant effect that is extremely difficult to reproduce in modern random construction. Similar phenomena have been documented in the megalithic structures of Ireland, in the cave temples of Malta, and in a number of other ancient cult spaces. What does this mean? Opinions diverge radically here. Some researchers believe it is a coincidence. The acoustic properties are a side effect of the specific chamber geometry, not the result of conscious design. Others believe that ancient builders had empirical knowledge of sound properties and used them in creating cult spaces to enhance the religious experience, to create a sense of supernatural presence through the physical impact of sound on the body and psyche. A number of researchers who have analyzed the description of Solomon's temple in biblical texts, its dimensions, proportions, materials used, have expressed the opinion that the described structure would have had acoustic properties, creating a characteristic resonance in the space of the Holy of Holies. Walls of hewn stone reflect sound. Ceiling beams of cedar absorb high frequencies. And the copper pillars Jachin and Boaz could, under certain conditions, act as resonators. A voice spoken in a space with such properties would sound fundamentally different than in an ordinary room. This is an architectural analysis based on acoustic physics. It is not proof that the temple was designed with an acoustic purpose, but it does not exclude it either. The question remains open. More speculative versions go much further, suggesting that the acoustic properties of underground spaces were used for some form of interspatial communication, that the system of tunnels and water-bearing layers created conditions for transmitting sound signals over long distances. This remains in the realm of hypotheses, unsupported by scientific data, and most researchers view such versions with skepticism. Now, to the question that is perhaps the most famous and most unresolved of all those related to underground Jerusalem. To the question of the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant, a wooden chest overlaid with gold, was, according to biblical description, the main sacred object of the first temple. It stood in the Holy of Holies, the inner chamber of the temple, which only the high priest was permitted to enter, and only once a year on Yom Kippur. According to the Torah, the ark contained the stone tablets given to Moses on Sinai. It accompanied the Israelites throughout their wanderings in the desert and was later placed in the temple by Solomon. After the destruction of the first temple by the Babylonians in 586 BCE, the ark disappears from historical sources. This disappearance is one of the greatest mysteries of biblical history. What happened to it? There are several versions, each with its own proponents. The first version is that the ark was taken to Babylon along with the other treasures of the temple. The problem with this version is that Babylonian chronicles, recording the loot captured during the destruction of Jerusalem, list gold and silver vessels, but the ark is not mentioned in this list. When the Persian king Cyrus conquered Babylon and issued his famous decree to return all temple valuables to the Jews, the ark is also absent from the list of returned items. The second version is that the ark was destroyed by the Babylonians. This version has the merit of explaining its absence in any subsequent sources. However, it has a practical problem. A golden chest is more valuable intact than melted down. There are no obvious reasons why the conquerors would destroy a golden object instead of capturing it. The third version is that the ark was hidden by priests before the fall of Jerusalem. This version has some textual confirmation. The second book of Maccabees, a text written significantly later than the events, contains an episode in which the prophet Jeremiah hides the tabernacle and the ark in a cave. And this place shall remain unknown until God gathers the congregation of the people. This reference to a cave on the mountain to which Jeremiah ascended has led researchers to various identifications, primarily with the Temple Mount or with Mount Nebo in Transjordan. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church has its own living tradition, according to which the Ark of the Covenant is located in the Church of Mary of Zion in the city of Axum. According to this tradition, the Ark was taken out of Jerusalem even before the Babylonian conquest during the reign of King Solomon by the son of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, known in Ethiopian tradition as Menelik I. The ark in Axum is guarded by a monk who is the only person permitted to see it. Verification of this version is impossible by definition. In Israel, there exists its own traditional version. A number of rabbinical authorities believe that the ark was hidden in an underground chamber beneath the Temple Mount and remains there to this day. It is precisely this version that gives particular urgency to the question of the prohibition of excavations under the mountain. If the ark is there, its discovery would change the religious reality of three religions simultaneously. In this context, the data from ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted over various years under and around the Temple Mount are of particular interest. Certain results of these surveys, specifically data indicating the presence of undocumented voids at significant depths beneath the mountain's foundation, have become the basis for the version of a secret chamber. However, the full data from these surveys have not been published, and the interpretation of individual results remains a subject of debate among specialists. Concluding this investigation, it is worth saying something important about the very nature of the mystery of underground Jerusalem. Most cities with underground monuments have one main secret: the catacombs of Rome, the labyrinths of Paris, the cave cities of Cappadocia. Jerusalem is an exception. It does not have one main secret. It has millennia of layers, each of which is a source of its own questions. Stones that do not fit into calculations. Tunnels laid with precision ahead of their era. Water systems whose scale surpasses any practical needs of a small mountain city. Sealed passages, filled shafts. Documents transferred to state archives with restricted access. Some of these mysteries have a prosaic explanation that simply hasn't been found yet. Some are explained by political considerations hindering investigation. Some may be explained by the fact that their discovery would create insoluble contradictions in the historical narrative that underpins the claims of different sides to this land. And some, the very part that concerns the Ark of the Covenant, remains fundamentally insoluble. Not because an answer does not exist, but because searching for an answer is impossible without consequences that extend far beyond academic science. This is why underground Jerusalem is not merely a historical monument. It is a space where the past and present exist in a constant, unstable equilibrium, where each new discovery changes something in the political reality of the surface, where the decision not to dig is as much a political act as the decision to dig. Charles Warren, who descended into a shaft with a candle in 1867, discovered that beneath the modern city lay another. A century and a half has passed. Ground-penetrating radar, LiDAR, laser scanning, all modern technologies have confirmed what he saw by candlelight and revealed new details. But a complete map of underground Jerusalem still does not exist. Perhaps it is not about the technology. Perhaps it is because some parts of this map are too dangerous to draw, not in a physical, but in a historical and political sense. The city, destroyed 23 times, preserved beneath itself everything that was destroyed. And this everything is still alive, in the sense that it continues to define the present. The stones beneath our feet remember everything. The question is what exactly we are prepared to learn. There is another aspect of underground Jerusalem that deserves a separate discussion: the history of attempts to reach what is hidden under the Temple Mount by completely unexpected participants. This is the history of the Templars. The Order of the Templars, the Order of the Poor Knights of Christ in the Temple of Solomon, was founded around 1118, shortly after the capture of Jerusalem by the Crusaders. According to official history, the order was created to protect pilgrims on the roads of the Holy Land. That the order's name itself and the location of its original headquarters, the southeastern part of the Temple Mount, traditionally identified with the Stables of Solomon, enormous underground halls with arched vaults, gave rise to a persistent version that the true goal of the order's founders was excavations under the mountain. The large underground chambers known today as the Stables of Solomon are real structures. This is a system of underground halls created and rebuilt over many centuries. Some date back to the Herodian period, some were added later. The Templars used them for keeping horses, hence the popular name. Whether they conducted systematic excavations there in search of treasures of the first temple is unknown. There are no direct historical evidences for this. The version about the Templars and the Ark of the Covenant is part of a vast medieval and modern European tradition, mixing real history with legend. What is reliably known? The Templars spent a significant part of their nearly 2-century existence in Jerusalem. They had privileged access to the Temple Mount. They accumulated enormous wealth, the nature and origin of which contemporaries explained differently. When the order was destroyed by order of the French king Philip the Fair in 1307, most of its treasures disappeared without a trace, where, to this day, remains a subject of debate, legends, and numerous conspiracy theories. The real history of the Templars and its connection to Jerusalem deserves serious historical interest, regardless of whether they found anything under the mountain. It is the history of the first organization in medieval Europe that combined military and religious functions, created a prototype of an international banking system, and left behind a trace in European architecture, jurisprudence, and culture that is discernible to this day. Let us now turn to what is the central question for understanding the entire topic of underground Jerusalem. The question of why this city was built precisely here, on the summit of a mountain ridge, far from major trade routes, without access to the sea, without large rivers nearby. Jerusalem, from a practical point of view, is not the most obvious choice for a principal city. Compared to other capitals of the Middle East, Damascus, Alexandria, Babylon, it is located significantly less conveniently from the perspective of trade, agriculture, and water supply. And yet, here, on this mountain ridge, people built again and again for 3,000 years. The answer offered by Jewish tradition is that at the center of the choice was not a practical consideration, but a religious one. The Temple Mount is the place where, according to tradition, Abraham intended to sacrifice Isaac. This place is the navel of the earth, the point where heavenly and earthly space touch with particular intensity. The same stone lying at the foundation of the Dome of the Rock is called the Even Shetiyah, the foundation stone. According to Jewish mystical tradition, the creation of the world began precisely from it. It is precisely this concept of a sacred geographical center that explains why Jerusalem was chosen, why it was held with such tenacity, why it was destroyed and rebuilt again and again, and why 3 religions attach such significance to it, incomparable with its practical significance as a city. It is not just a place, it is an idea. And precisely this idea lies beneath all those stones, tunnels, and cisterns we have discussed today. Now, it is worth speaking about that aspect of the topic which occupied much space in the transcript of the original video, the versions linking underground Jerusalem with mysterious technological systems. These versions require particular caution, and we will strive to maintain precisely such caution. The idea that the Ark of the Covenant could have been something more than a religious symbol, that it could have possessed physical properties, produced physical effects, is one of the most popular in the genre of historical conspiracy. The grounds for it are drawn primarily from the biblical text itself. The book of Samuel describes physical phenomena associated with the ark's presence, the death of a man touching it, diseases among the Philistines who captured it, the fall of a statue in the temple of Dagon. The 3rd book of Kings describes the consecration of the temple by Solomon, and a cloud filling the building with such intensity that the priests could not stand. How to interpret these descriptions? There are fundamentally different approaches here. The traditional religious approach. These are descriptions of real miracles, manifestations of divine presence, which do not require a materialistic explanation and do not allow reduction to physical processes. The rationalistic theological approach. These are literary images conveying spiritual meaning through figurative language. The cloud, a metaphor for divine presence, not a physical phenomenon. A number of researchers, engineers, physicists, historians of science, have proposed versions that the described phenomena could have physical explanations. The most famous of them is the version of the ark as an electrical capacitor. Gold plates, separated by acacia wood, could theoretically be described as a primitive condensing system. Touching such a device under certain conditions could lead to a strong electrical discharge. This version is not physically absurd. The principle of a capacitor described by such a construction is real. But whether the Ark of the Covenant is precisely what this version describes is a question science has no answer to, since the Ark itself is absent, and there is no possibility to study it. Most researchers regard this version as an interesting speculation lacking an evidential basis. Even more speculative are versions of an underground Jerusalem as a kind of system, a network of tunnels, reservoirs, and chambers functioning as a single technical device with acoustic, electrical, or other physical properties. These versions, actively reproduced in popular publications and videos, mix real, documented facts, the acoustic properties of some underground chambers, the geometric precision of construction, with conjecture about the intentional design of these properties for purposes that the authors of these versions usually leave vague. An honest assessment of this position is as follows. The documented facts about the acoustic properties of a number of ancient structures are real and deserve serious scientific study. The question of whether these properties were created intentionally or are a side effect of specific geometry remains open. Versions about communication systems through aquifers, resonant devices, and space-time nodes fall outside the realm of scientifically verifiable statements and are, as a rule, the subject of non-scientific literature. This does not mean that underground Jerusalem is uninteresting or that it holds no mysteries. There are more than enough mysteries there, real, documented, historically significant ones. But precisely because the real mysteries are so interesting, there is no need to add fictional ones to them. Let us consider another important layer of the topic. How exactly different religious traditions understand the space beneath the Temple Mount, and what makes this place the subject of such intense attention from three religions. For Judaism, the Temple Mount is Makom HaMikdash, the place of the sanctuary. This is not merely a historical treasure. It is the place toward which prayers have been directed for millennia of diaspora. Jewish law prescribes praying in the direction of Jerusalem. At the center of every Passover Seder, the phrase, "Next year in Jerusalem," is recited. The destruction of the temple is a constant theme of mourning rituals, the fast of Tisha B'Av. A number of halachic authorities consider the Temple Mount so sacred that they forbid Jews from entering it until the temple is rebuilt, to avoid defiling the holy place with their ritual impurity. Other authorities disagree. This dispute continues to this day. For Islam, Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, the farthest mosque, is the third holiest site on earth. It is from here, according to the Quran and Hadiths, that the Prophet Muhammad began his night journey, Isra and Miraj, from Mecca to Jerusalem, and then ascended to heaven. The Dome of the Rock, standing over the very stone from which, according to tradition, the ascension began, is one of the architectural masterpieces of early Islamic construction. It was erected at the end of the 7th century AD and has survived to this day almost in its original form. For Christianity, Jerusalem is the place of the passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, standing in the Christian quarter of the Old City, traditionally marks the site of Golgotha in the tomb. Beneath the church itself, there are also extensive underground spaces, some of which were discovered in the first centuries of Christianity, and some of which are still being explored. It is precisely this coincidence of sacred significance of the same physical place for three different traditions that creates the unique situation in which every centimeter of underground Jerusalem is a potential point of conflict. To find evidence beneath the Temple Mount that unequivocally confirms the historicity of one narrative means potentially casting doubt on another. Any discovery here is immediately interpreted politically, even if the scientists themselves strive for a strictly academic interpretation. This is why the ban on excavations under the Mount is not merely a political agreement. It is, in a sense, a fragile theological truce. Not to disturb the ground means not to disturb the claims. To leave the underground space closed is to preserve the possibility for each tradition to hold its own reading of this place. Understanding this logic explains why a complete map of underground Jerusalem will not be published in the near future, not for technical reasons, but for reasons related to the very nature of what is called a holy place in a world where different traditions assert competing claims to it. Before concluding our investigation, it is worth saying a few words about what the very phenomenon of an underground city means, not only in relation to Jerusalem, but also in a broader historical context. Jerusalem is an extreme, but not the only example of a city where history literally goes underground. Rome, with its catacombs, stretching for hundreds of kilometers, is another example. Cappadocia in central Turkey, a region where entire cities were carved into tuff at depths of several dozen meters below the surface, is a third. London, with its medieval cellars buried under the streets of the city. Athens, with its ancient aqueducts. Istanbul, with its Byzantine cisterns, some of which still hold water to this day. In all these cases, underground space was used not out of whim, but out of pressing necessity. It provided protection from enemies, stored water during droughts, served as a burial place, and ensured a constant temperature for storing food. It was survival infrastructure, as important as roads and walls, but invisible from the surface. What makes Jerusalem unique is not the mere fact of having underground spaces, but their scale, their multi-layered nature, and, most importantly, their inextricable link with religious meaning. In most other cities, the underground city is a historical monument that is studied and shown to tourists. In Jerusalem, the underground city is a living space over which political and religious claims loom, making its study part of current history, not just past history. It is precisely this distinction between a monument and a living space that is key to understanding why underground Jerusalem remains an area where the possibilities of science are limited, not by technical, but by political and religious considerations. Concluding this investigation, let us return to the questions with which we began. What exactly is hidden beneath Jerusalem? We now know enough to answer this question in general terms. Beneath the city lie 23 destroyed and buried cities whose layers descend to a depth of 18 meters. There lie the remains of monumental structures from all eras, from Canaanite fortifications of the Bronze Age to Herodian platforms of the 1st century A.D. There run 12 kilometers of documented tunnels and even more undocumented ones. There, water is stored in cisterns with a capacity of millions of liters. There lie stones that modern engineering could only lift using heavy machinery. Why is there no complete map of this space? Because a map is a political document, not just a scientific one. Because every tunnel is a potential cause for conflict. Because beneath the mount, which is simultaneously the third holiest site in Islam and the site of the future temple of Jewish messianic expectation, There is no such discovery that would be politically neutral. Where is the Ark of the Covenant? No one knows. The version of its storage in Ethiopia is a living tradition, unverifiable by definition. The version of its location beneath the Temple Mount is a theological hope, unsupported by direct evidence. The version of its destruction or removal is logically possible, but also unproven. The absence of the Ark in any historical sources after 586 BC remains one of the great mysteries of biblical history. What happens when ground-penetrating radar operates beneath the dome of the rock and shows anomalies at significant depths? The data is classified, interpretations remain closed, and no public discussion takes place. This in itself speaks to how sensitive this space is. Jerusalem is a unique city, not because it has more history than other cities in the world, but because history continues there, literally, physically, in every square meter of its soil. The past here is not over. It lies beneath the present, and the present, with all its political sharpness and religious tension, is a direct continuation of what was laid down thousands of years ago. Charles Warren descended into a shaft in 1867 and discovered that beneath him was another city, and beneath that, another. This discovery did not close. It continues. There is one fact that usually escapes notice in discussions about underground Jerusalem, and which is perhaps the most eloquent of all we have learned today. This fact concerns the attitude of the city's own inhabitants to what lies beneath their feet. In most cities of the world, the underground historical layer is something distant and abstract, a tourist attraction visited once a year. In Jerusalem, this is not the case. The inhabitants of the old city live in constant proximity to the underground past. In the houses of the Jewish quarter, which were destroyed in 1948 and rebuilt after 1967, Roman, Byzantine, Herodian, and earlier layers were constantly discovered during construction. Every foundation here is an encounter with several eras at once. It is precisely this physical continuity, when history is literally under your feet, when you can touch it by descending into a basement, that creates that special relationship with time which distinguishes Jerusalem from all other cities in the world. Here, the past is not a memory. It is part of the present. And that is why what happens in underground Jerusalem, real discoveries, closed tunnels, classified data, is part of the present to the same extent as it is part of the past.